when exactly do you have players roll stealth? And like, how frequently do you do it per instance? I did a poll on YouTube a while back where I kind of posed this question, like a rogue's going into a castle, let's say, and they say, DM, I want a stealth. Do you roll it right then? Do you wait until someone's around and have them roll, even though if they don't know that they're there, but then now they know that there's a chance? Do you roll for every little guard? Because that's like 100 different rolls. They're bound to be beat by one of them. 89% of the poll, people said roll when the situation changes enough. Usually they would have them roll once, and then like if something changes enough. So it's pretty ambiguous, far and away by everyone's interpretation, but inherently so as well.
It's funny you say that about the poll, because I fully agree with that assessment. You know, when you posed this question, I was like, I think I just kind of go with my gut for a lot of these instances, but now I have to kind of try and create some sort of guideline because I don't feel like that's a satisfying answer. Kind of running off of this kind of formula. Yeah, in a scenario where players like, we're going to start being stealthy. I'm like, great, roll now. I'm going to roll off of that result until they tell me they're not being stealthy, until the situation drastically changes, and I'm going to use that result for any creature that they're not aware of. I'm not going to tell them anybody's around to possibly passive percept their stealth, but those I'll be running mechanically in the background. Should they, for example, come across somebody now, or a group of gnolls around a campfire, say, I'll be like, all right, this is a possible chance where we might need to re-roll that stealth because this is a new instance. And say maybe roleplay begins to kick in, like one of the players panics because they're terrified of gnolls. Maybe I'll have to have them re-roll stealth because they're panicking, you know, they might not keep their composure. Or if they're planning out what they're going to do, I'll be like, I think you might be talking too loud because you haven't specified that you're talking in hushed tones. We're going to re-roll the group stealth. I think one roll per every scenario or drastic change in the situation is totally sufficient, unless roleplay for some reason kicks up some interesting flaw probably in a character.
When I saw this question, I was like, is Jordan trying to get me to talk about stealth, perception, and invisibility? Because if he is, I'm not going to do it.
I would never do that to you again, Fred. I know that you hate that topic, but at least stealth rolls. At least we don't have to get into the nitty gritty.
So I'd say generally yes to your main response from your poll, with a caveat on there are going to be conditions and exceptions. I think primarily because the concept of the interplay between, you know, sneaking and hiding and stealth, or noticing something, or perception, or whatever you want to call it, all that is actually really complicated. And I think Jeremy Crawford has tried to make this apparent, but people have not figured it out, that they can't give you like a definitive, like easy, clear-cut set of rules. What they've given you is guidelines for making decisions, and the ultimate decision is made by a highly advanced supercomputer that is inside the Dungeon Master's brain. And that's how it works. That's the reality, is like you've got to take all those different things, and we've discussed this like in early tabletop gaming, like to eliminate trying to calculate everything and roll for everything. The Dungeon Master or the Game Master or the referee was actually having to make decisions about what made the most sense given the situation. Generally, when it comes to stealth, if the players are trying to be stealthy, I won't necessarily make them roll, but I now note it that they are being stealthy, and they may require a roll at some point when they need to. And when they need to, I think I break down into when the monster might notice them. Now, whether that's be see them, smell them, because some monsters have scent and some monsters have tremor sense. So when the creature might notice them, okay, now this is probably a good time to roll the stealth, and then I'm either going to use perception or I'm going to use passive perception based on some other conditions maybe. There might be advantage, might be disadvantage. In terms of them stealthing and requiring a roll, if the monsters are distracted, I'm probably not going to use passive perception or perception checks. If they're distracted but they walk right out in front of them, the stealth isn't going to be much good unless we're just worrying about sound, right? But if they're coming from behind and I'm applying facing to my situation, monster's distracted and you're coming up from behind, I still don't need you to actually, you told me you're being quiet or stealthy, but I don't actually require a roll from you, because I'm not going to be using a roll for my monster either, because it doesn't know what the heck's going on around it right now. It's too busy eating its spaghetti or playing dice or getting drunk. or whatever it is. Like, one of those things. I would also say there are going to be times where like stealth might apply because they can't be seen. Now, whether that's invisibility or they're using cover, it really doesn't matter. I think that one of the things that I always try to remind myself is you don't necessarily need to have cover to be able to be sneaky or stealthy. There might be situations, and that's where the Dungeon Master's advanced brain power comes in and their experience as to when it would be appropriate to do something with that. Is it going to be appropriate that maybe they're stepping on leaves and twigs and they're going to make noise? So maybe we're going to apply your stealth check, and I'm going to use either passive perception or a perception check to figure out if they actually does the monster notice that you're sneaking up behind it as you're stepping on the crinkly leaves. Like, yeah, it's not as simple as it seems. So lots of different stuff going on there.
Absolutely. And you touched on a few things. One is cover, because in D&D 5th edition, all creatures are basically assumed to be just like omni-directional, like they can see all around them. And so it makes it really complicated if you look at the way they set up the rules to like approach a creature, like to try to like jump on them if you're a rogue or something, Technically, if you're not behind cover or invisible or something, it's like, what are you going to do? Like what Fred just said, I think DMs should talk to their players and say, like, there will be instances where the way monsters are facing or the way they're acting is what I'm going to weigh more than just whether you have cover or not. And that's a good conversation to have. So session 0, if you're a player who thinks you might do stealthy things, ask your DM about this, because if they're going to make you roll 100 times when you go into a castle because there's just 100 guards in there, then that's kind of weird. And then you also don't kind of want to ruin it where, like, if you're going into a castle and they say, okay, roll stealth, like as you take your first step, and you roll bad, and so you like kick a rock and you're like, oh, I'm not going anymore, guys. Like, that's awkward too, right? So lots of considerations.
If you had to pick one like rule or thing I've changed the most in my games over the years, it has to be this one. I've tried so many different methods to like figure out how a good, like when to roll stealth. I've tried rolling the player's stealth for them, but I never liked that because it takes away player agency too much. I've tried separating visual stealth from auditory stealth from, olfactory stealth, whether they can smell them. 3.5 did this a little bit, where they had 2 different checks for stealth. One was hide and one was move silently, and you had different scores for each of those. My players didn't like that because it gave them more chances to fail, and it was just more complicated than rolling a single die, adding a single number, and then having your a result immediately after. Right now, how I choose when to roll stealth, I do have them only make one roll with their normal stealth modifier. I choose to, whenever I try to figure out whether a stealth roll should be rolled or not, I have to ask myself, would the situation change drastically if they failed a stealth roll right now? If there's something they're trying to avoid, if a monster is going to hear them and attack and roll initiative, if you get a natural 1 on stealth right now, yeah, I'm going to make you roll to try to not be heard, not be seen from those monsters.
Well, first of all, you reminded me of Pathfinder stuff I've heard about where I've seen it compared to 5th edition for stealth and hiding and everything, and there's like different degrees, like a creature is aware of a threat versus like completely unaware, bump them on the head sort of stuff. And I think that's pretty interesting.
One other thing I forgot to mention was how you describe failed stealth rolls. I think this is one of the most comedic things you can do in the game, where someone in plate armor gets that natural 1 on their disadvantaged stealth roll. You can say, yes, they go off screen and you see a pot rolling across the bottom of the screen and you hear the cartoonish crash, or they are not looking where they're going and they run face first into the belly of an ogre. I think that's one of the most fun kind of comedic descriptions that I can do in my games.
Yeah, absolutely. And you did remind me of something I wanted to talk about a little bit, which is travel stealth. Like you're doing like overland travel for a day, but you're moving slow to try to keep your presence unknown, which is like part of the travel rules. It's not that you're being stealthy like the whole time necessarily, but when there's a threat or something going on, it's like, how stealthy are you? You're kind of rolling ahead of time to see how that goes. And that makes a little bit more sense than like when something's actively happening. Yeah, that's a little bit different. Just wanted to throw that out there. And then there's also group stealth checks where like if half the party succeeds, the rules say like you treat it as if the group succeeded or whatever, which is pretty interesting. So then all of a sudden the paladin, as clunky as they may be, maybe they're redeemed by how good everyone else is, so they don't bring down everyone who is stealthy. So I actually think that's a good rule, so that it's not like if you have a rogue in the party, the paladin just always ruins it for them. That's just an interesting thing. Not being contrary to what you said, because I completely agree that botched stealth rolls are one of the most fun things to describe.
It's just another reason to hate paladins, right?
We just keep coming back to that.
There's the comedic answer, and then there's a serious one. The comedic answer is it depends if I want them to succeed. I'm very much a narrative GM. I am not a dungeon hack and slasher. I run campaigns. My last campaign that I ran, which was Amethyst, ran for 11 years. One of the things I love about 5e, high on that list, is passive perception. I think it was a great rule that they implemented. If I want them to succeed at a task of stealth, I have them roll once, and then that satisfies it. If I want them to fail, maybe I'll have them roll a couple times until they fail, and I can use that to my advantage. But to be honest, though, it connects to a larger issue about inherent skill and the randomness. If someone is a rogue with a high dex and they got extra emphasis on stealth, I am open to the idea that they never need, if they roll under a 10 or a 15, they always go with 15, because Gordon Ramsay never rolls a 1. A doctor, a pilot, they can't roll a 1. Some players want that randomness. They'd rather roll and fail rather than me as a GM say, you're actually good at your job. You don't need to roll. The other players maybe so, but if a rogue's trying to be stealthy on his own, unless someone is actively searching for them, I have no problem saying, no, you're good at your job. Nathan, you are good at your job at being a rogue. And I try to encourage this more, and I've been trying to play with this idea more often, that if you're really good at something, you should be always good at something. And so it's one of those situations like, oh, it's really funny when they roll a 1. I go, yeah, but if this guy's a professional thief, he never rolls a 1. And there should be something implanted within the system that says, you know what? You don't roll 1s. You're Gordon Ramsay. You're making you're serving a meal. You're never rolling a 1. That being said, whenever there's an NPC rolling stealth against a PC, I never roll. Well, I do, but the result is whatever I want it to be because I'm the GM. The GM doesn't cheat. Players hate having passive perception. They'll say I was actively searching, and I'll call them on their BS and say, no, you weren't. I rolled against your passive perception, and they beat it. But yeah, that's my opinion on stealth. For players, active stealth it's part of a larger conversation regarding inherent skill. And if they're really, really, really good at it, like if a fighter wants to be stealthy and he's wearing armor and he's not proficient in something that allows him to be stealthy, yeah, maybe I'll roll. But if it's a rogue, maybe they always get away with it. And I definitely endorse the idea of facing, which is something I kind of enjoyed with 4th edition that we moved away from. The fact that this omnidirectional attention, no video game uses that has a stealth mechanic, so why does D&D have omnidirectional vision? I basically ignore that idea and say, no, you're behind that person, you can snake up.
I've done that so many times where I just say, you don't have to roll, you're good. The exception to me doing that is also considering like a rogue, level 10, they get reliable talent, where they treat anything below a 10 as a 10, and it's like, I don't want to just make it so you have reliable talent from level 1, and so like I have to consider that as well, or change reliable talent, whichever sounds more fun. But
well, yeah, I agree with you on that, but my issue with reliable talent is once again, I think this is something that should be applied to basically everybody, that everyone should have this one thing that they're really, really good at, and it should be like a trait. Like someone says, oh, you're a rogue. What's the one thing you're good at? Is it assassination? Is it pickpocketing? Is it stealth? Or if you're a cleric, what are you really good at? Healing? Like there should be something I think everybody player should get. And as early as 4th or 5th level, like the idea of pushing reliable talent back, I think that reliable threshold can advance. Maybe at 1st level, it's a 5. Maybe when you get to 3rd or 4th, it becomes a 10. When you get to 10th level, it becomes a 15. When you're 20th level, guess what? It's a 20 or higher because you're so awesome at this. And I like that idea of implementing. I'm going to write that down, actually.
Yeah, write it down before you forget. It can kind of depend on people's philosophy for what a dice roll is. I think I'm a little atypical sometimes because sometimes I interpret roll not necessarily as like skill, but good fortune. Like if you're stealthing into a situation, but the family dog that you didn't know was there just happens to run by and make the person turn around and then they see you, so it's kind of I also have like the happenstance of like, oh, all of a sudden the wind picks up and blows your scent right at somebody, or a sheet that was hiding your shadow falls all of a sudden, and so all of a sudden someone sees your shadow behind, so I kind of like the idea of like rolls are also just like how the universe is behaving, to see how your skill interacts with that as well. And so if people like that, then keep that in mind as well.
I'm going to piggyback a little bit off what Chris said, because one of the things he said is exactly how I run stealth, which is my overarching theme, just like it was for Paladins, is fun for my players. Now, to me, when someone picks a rogue, they're picking that character because they can sneak. So like Chris said, I am not having my rogue roll at all unless they're trying to sneak by a big bad, someone that really should be able to perceive them. But common guards, there's no way in hell they're spotting our rogue if he's alone sneaking or she's alone. Now, if the paladin tries to sneak, I'm also not going to roll. I just don't let them sneak if they're wearing armor, unless it's by a distracted monster, field of vision, all that stuff comes into play. The other thing that comes into play, again, what Chris said, is I'm kind of story driven myself. So I'm not going to have them fail a stealth check when it could ruin the whole adventure, right? There's no fun in that for the players. The only time I'm rolling stealth is when it's going to add to the tension. When the fear of that discovery, where they know if they get discovered, they're probably going to die. To me, when the game gets tense, that roll means something. And I'm still going to make it come out how I want for fun for the players. But they have to feel like something's on the line. I'm not having them sneak by like a goblin guard and having to roll and worry that the guard is going to hear them and attack. I want the rogue to feel like a rogue. And to me, that's going off alone and scouting out the castle, not with the whole party trailing along. So that rogue should be able to do that. But if they try to sneak by a dragon, then it's trouble, right? But I'm not letting the fighter, the paladin, the cleric in armor, they're not sneaking by anything unless it's super distracted and looking the other way or asleep or whatever. Stealth to me is almost the domain of rogues alone. Other people trying to move quietly, they're not going to do a great job, so they can only do it very situationally. And I think that makes the rogue feel more special. Or maybe you have a ranger, you might want to let them, they have that stealth element to their game also in moving quietly. But the other characters, I just don't think they would be proficient at it at all, basically. And unless it makes the adventure a lot more fun, like if I need them to sneak by something, I'll let them all sneak by, even the paladin. But in general, I don't want those other characters sneaking. It's not what they do. They wouldn't be good at it at all. And they wouldn't even be anywhere remotely close to what a rogue or maybe a ranger could do. So I want those characters to feel empowered by what they've chosen, just like the paladin feels empowered to just run straight into the face of a big bad, and with their armor, they know they're not going to die. I want my rogue to feel like they can go scout everything out, and if someone's not specifically looking for them, no one's going to see them. It's just not going to happen. They're, like Chris said, they're too good at their job. So I think makes it a lot more fun for our rogue to feel like they have these rogue abilities, and that the fighter can't do what they can do. Because otherwise, why be a rogue then, right? Like, what's the point of that? That'd be like allowing your fighter to cast Fireball, right? That's why I hate dual classes, by the way. Everyone should feel special doing what they do well, and the other characters shouldn't be able to do what they do. So for me, stealth is very situational. And sometimes I might make the rogue roll just to build the tension, even though I'm just going to make them pass no matter what, probably. Even on a 1, I'll say, well, the guard was looking the other way or got distracted. Just to make them feel like something's going on. But I think it's really important for the players to just enjoy the game. And I think that's letting a rogue be a rogue and not letting a paladin be a rogue.
That's a very archetypical way to approach it, right? More narrative based.
As a DM, I always feel like I can't let rules ever get in the way of the people having fun, right? So whatever I'm doing, whatever rule I'm looking at, I'm always stepping back to see how will it impact their fun if I get closer to rules as written, right? As opposed to rules that are fun. So I use them as a basis to make the adventure more fun, and it gives the players some framework to operate in where they know what they should do or shouldn't do, but you can't let all of that get in the way in the end of fun. And that role playing, for some people is really key, so I don't want to infringe on their fun by using rules to infringe on it.
That's a great approach, and I know a lot of people like that style. That's a great. Thanks for expounding on that. And it reminded me of something from the poll I ran. A common complaint that I've heard is people don't like it when the rogue goes off on their own because everyone else just has to watch what they do. So people prefer to stumble along with the rogue, and it can often ruin what the rogue wants to do. But it was pointed out that so often these other classes like wizards, they get to go role play, going to a shop and buying a scroll so they can learn a new spell for 5 to 10 minutes. But if the rogue sneaks off for 5 to 10 minutes, everyone loses their minds. And I thought that was a really good point, is oftentimes there's these little micro moments where someone kind of has the spotlight on them and they get to do what they want. But for some reason, rogues kind of get a bad rap and people don't like them going off on their own. Maybe because often if they fail, you've split the party and there's combat and the rogue's in trouble. Maybe that's the hesitance. Maybe it's not trusting them. I don't know. But keep that in mind, everyone, that sometimes rogues, they just want to have that moment to shine a little bit, just like other classes do.
I had one thought, and now that I gotta go last, I have so many thoughts that I'm getting anxiety over. I'm just I don't know which one to bring up first. So I'm just gonna answer your question. When exactly do you have players roll stealth? And I think it's already been laid out perfectly here that it's going to come with experience of being a dungeon master or a game master. If you've had a good experience with when you asked for stealth rolls or when you didn't, then you learn over time. You gain experience as a DM or a GM. How frequently, for instance, I'm also in the boat of less less rolls on this. So I feel one time is really good. If we're sneaking into a warehouse or something, then up until they actually have an encounter or see something or, meet someone face to face, maybe combat or whatnot, I think the one roll is sufficient. Now to go with all my notes that I wrote while everybody else was talking. We do have extra passive scores, and this is touched on quite a few times by everybody else. So someone like a rogue can have a passive stealth score. And with that passive stealth score, I mean, it could be in the mid 20s. I mean, it could probably even approach 30 at some point. So I'm very much in the boat of if your rogue is wanting to sneak off and scout ahead, they're probably not going to be seen. They have that passive stealth. I mean, they're an expert at this. They're going to be able to go up. However, a lot of the times the rest of the party has also said they don't like to stay behind. So I'll do, and I think you mentioned this, Jordan, I like to do group stealth checks with that point, and maybe put a little bit extra weight on the rogue because they're really good at that. And I usually go with greater than 50% everybody's successful. Now that's not to say that the rogue can't still try to sneak off into the shadows, AD&D first edition stuff there. But I'm a big fan of group stealth checks if they're all going together. But if the rogue's going off by themselves, then just take the passive score. They're probably not going to need to worry about it. And I mean, if you really want to dig into things, you can give your antagonists, your bad guys, your monsters, whatever, you can give them a passive perception. Up to you as a DM. What I do want to mention is adjusting on the fly the stealth, because, and this is something I do as a DM behind the scenes. I don't announce it. I don't really have set rules for it. Again, I kind of just go off of experience. And again, this was mentioned previously, seeing, smelling, and hearing. Now, you could have great stealth rolls. And by the way, I don't usually like to give away the results. I'm just like, ask for a stealth roll and be like, okay. And then, they're like, well, did I succeed? I don't know. Find out. But if you just crawled out of a sewer and you've got a monster, let's say a guard dog or something, they're going to smell that. So you're going to have a little bit of a penalty on your stealth roll because you reek. I mean, or, even in a tavern, or like you're trying to sneak into an office, they're going to smell somebody that just came out of the sewer. It's going to be evident. The same with if you just got done downing a bunch of beers at the brewery and you walk in somewhere, you're going to reek of beer. I mean, smell is a big one. So it's going to depend on where they came from. The same thing with hearing too. I mean, if they have something that's going to clank on them, they picked up some like tin pots or whatever else and decided to make something cool out of it, it's going to clank back and forth. So seeing, smelling, and hearing are all factors that can go in when you're trying to get the stealth. One of the other things I like to do is I like to ask, what kind of a pace are you moving at? Are you trying to get there to your destination? Are you going at a normal pace, or are you going at a slow and cautious pace? And I'll take that into account. And there's advantages and disadvantages. If they're moving really quick, then they may catch kobolds setting up a trap. But if they're going really slow, that trap's already set. So I've got all these things in my mind when I ask for pacing. So there's some benefits to some and some disadvantages to the other. And then the last thing that I'd like to mention is spellcasting. There's been a lot of times we'll be in like in an inn or a tavern or something, and they're going like, I'm going to cast Charm Person. I'm like, okay, well, that they can see you casting a spell, right? Because you've got your verbal and your somatic components. Like, yeah, I'm just going to whisper it. I'm going to be sneaky. So then I'm going to ask them to roll a stealth for the verbal and maybe even a sleight of hand for the somatic components and see if they pass. And it's definitely not a rule in a rule book anywhere, but I think it's a lot of fun and it adds to it. So it gives them a chance to be able to cast that spell without anybody seeing them, but they also have that chance for failure. Those are just some of the things that I've encountered along the way. And again, I think knowing when to roll a stealth check is going to be with your experience as a DM.
Those are great points, Wally, and it reminded me, it is such a good topic. I have a video about playing an enchantment wizard, and you need to ask the DM, like, how evident is my spell casting? How easily can I cast Charm Person in front of others, or can I not at all? Or is there a chance? It's a good question to ask. Something else you said I latched onto, which was, you kind of piggybacked on what Dennis said, the olfactory, the auditory, all those things. So if you come out of a sewer, it encourages teamwork. Because all of a sudden it's like, wizard, can you Febreze me? And they say, sure thing. And they press a digitation you to get all the muck off of you or mask your smell and that sort of stuff. So fun role playing moments. Or if you don't have that, it's like, we got to wash up real quick. Where's the bathroom in this place? And try to sneak and find a bathroom as like a subplot. There's some fun to be had.
I did forget to mention seeing too. Light sources. If you're in a dark place, how are you going to see? Not everyone has dark vision. Well, my groups would always do, but if you have a light source and you turn that off to be sneaky or to use stealth, you could trip over something. Or if you leave your light source on, you're going to be seen.
And if you're moving at night with a torch and you think you've been seen, you can leave the torch somewhere and you sneak off onto the night, and whoever's coming to find your torch, you come up behind them like, looking for me, so there's some fun to be had there.
I think the thing that comes in and really causes problems for dungeon masters who are trying trying to put a stamp on it and decide what they are going to do with stealth is people who are playing races, and almost all of the 5e races have dark vision, and they are moving around in darkness, right? Because you're told that if they have dark vision and they're moving in darkness, they can see as if it's dim light from a certain distance, 60 feet, right? And what people fail to understand is seeing in dim light is actually not great. You can actually, when I finally realized, okay, so why the hell am I applying disadvantage to somebody who is seeing an area as if it's dim light? It's because they can't see clearly. That's why I'm applying that. So that follows that you could probably sneak up on somebody even if they have dark vision if you're in darkness and you're 60 feet away, because they can't actually see clearly.
They perceive movement. That's really it. They can't see any details. Someone that does a lot of stuff at night, I know perfectly well the fact that there's a certain illumination. If you're driving at night where it's actually worse, you'd rather have your lights on than at dim light, because there's this perception that you can see when you actually can't.
That's exactly it. And I think for me, once I nailed that down, I was like, dark vision doesn't matter now. Like, it means that I can hide my monsters in darkness, even with a dark vision race, because they may not notice them.
Yeah, DMs out there, definitely consider all this discussion. How are you going to handle stealth? How are you going to be fair and consistent with your players?